In this lesson, we will be talking about how to handle our workspace and how to modify it. And we will also be talking about what are keyboard shortcuts, how to use them, and how to modify them. So we can start off right away by talking about our interface and seeing how we can modify it. Right away, you can notice that it is formed by 4 main blocks. We have this toolbar here on the left. We have our drop-down menus here on the top left corner. We have another toolbar here on the right with some shortcuts to the main uses that we use inside of our program. And here on the bottom, we have our color palettes. So where we select the colors and where we change the palettes. Moving our workspace, changing the way it is viewed, changing the position of some of these panels has a lot to do with the type of work that we are doing. It is purely a personal decision, and it can be very helpful if you are working on specific projects. For example, if we were working on a project where we know that we would only be using this toolbar here on the left, or at least mainly using it, we could decide to make this space larger. We can do that by moving our mouse right over this line that separates the toolbar from the ruler. And if we click and start dragging, you will notice how now it is occupying more space in our workspace. This is basically the most that it will occupy space-wise, but as we saw in the previous lesson, it is possible to make these icons larger, and in that case, it would occupy more space. But see how now we already have a lot more focus in this area. Another way we can modify our workspace is by heading down to this right arrow icon that we find here on the bottom right corner. We can select it and see that we have different options here. These will all open different types of panels. So for example, if we were going to open this one, the layers and objects panel, which we will see more what layers are in the next lessons, because this is one of the most important lessons that we can learn when working with graphic design programs. You will notice now that this panel has opened right here on the right, and that it is marked by a blue line right underneath. So we could have the option to move this panel, for example. So what we would need to do is click on the title here, select it, and start dragging. Notice how now this panel is lighting up in blue. This means that we can drop our layers here, so we could drop the panel here and leave it where it is. But if we start moving it around our workspace, we can see if any other blue boxes appear. So for example, here on the left, we can see that there's flashing blue light here. And this is an indication that we can drop our panel even in this section. So let's go ahead and deselect. And now we have moved our panel all the way to the left. So now we have more focus on our workspace here on the right. We have more focus on our document. And then all of our tools and main panels are here on the left. So we can go back here in our right arrow icon, click it again, and open one of these other ones. So for example, we can open up text and font. And again, it will open up a panel right here. Another very useful thing to know is that if we drag our mouse here, you will see that the mouse cursor changes. And like this, we can try and make it smaller, but it won't be completely disappeared because all we need to do is drag our mouse over it again and open it back up. Again, even in this case, here where it is lit up with blue, we can select it and start dragging. And notice how right away the panel on the left has started lighting up with blue. This means that we can drop this either right inside of this, or we can drop it here. So now we have both panels open one next to the other. So let's try and open another one. and we can see a different option. Here it opens up a window dialog simply, and this one you can drag and move around wherever you want. It doesn't need to be placed into a specific area, but we can continue moving it as much as we want. And obviously we can resize it to our preferences and leave it wherever we feel like it is more useful. Going back into this panel here in the bottom, we can open, for example, selectors and CSS. And here we can see that it has opened another panel. So another option that we have when moving our panels, so let's select this and start dragging. We can also drop it inside of here, but what we can do instead of adding it in a new row occupying so much space in our workspace, we can drop it inside of one of the already existing panels. So let's drop it in here. And now you will notice that we can open these a lot easier just by selecting which one we want to view. So instead of having every panel open, we can have them all neatly stacked here. So we can do this, for example, with the text and font panel as well. We can select it, start dragging, and drop it inside of here. So now notice that our panel has become way smaller, and simply all we need to do is select each panel that we want to view one at a time. That way we're not occupying too much of our workspace. Obviously, this is personal, as I said, it is very subjective. It also depends on the type of work that you are doing. You mightn't need any of these panels open, and in that case, they are very easy to close as well. We can either close them by selecting the little X here right next to them, like so, or we can select this arrow here and select close current tab or close panel. And that way we can go back to the original workspace view. And then here we can try opening another one again, for example, align and distribute. And now you can have two panels on the left and on the right. Again, in this case as well, we are able to move this around, decide where we want to drag and drop it, but let's just leave it here for now so that we can see how our workspace can be different. We can also notice here at the bottom that we have these two options: document properties and preferences. Document properties, we already viewed them in the previous lesson. Here we saw already quickly how we can change the view of our document. So for example, we can change the color of our page by selecting inside of this triangle and moving this around like so. We are able to change the color of our document. We can also change the color of the border, and we saw this as well previously, again, moving around this node inside of this triangle. And then moving here, we can change the tone and shade of what the color of our border will be, as you can see here. And we also saw how we can change the color of our desktop. So again, moving the node inside of this area here, we can choose a color and just decide what we can prefer. But let's leave it at gray for now and X out of it. All of these options as well, we viewed them quickly in the previous lesson. As they are more in depth, we will be seeing them more in detail in the next lessons when we'll be talking about guides and grids and also color. But we can also see quickly here that we have this option metadata. This is just to add more information to our document to be able to find it more easily inside of our computer. So we can add a title to it, for example, we can add a date to it, we can name the creator, so we can put our name into it. If it has specific rights or a specific publisher, identifier, source, and so on, we can add all of these informations. And also, very importantly, we can add keywords. This is simply so that we can find our document easier while we are searching in our computer. We can also use this information as default if we want, but it is not necessary right now, but it is good information to know for the future. But let's head back into our arrow here on the bottom and let's see preferences. This is the main part that we want to talk about as we are talking how to modify and change our workspace. We will find lots of information inside of this window to do so. For example, here in the left, we will find various different options that we can go into and see. We have the tools here, so all of the details that we will need to know for when we are going to go and talk about the tools that we have here in our toolbar. So obviously we will go and see these more in detail when we start talking about all of these tools, like how to create squares, ellipses, cubes, spirals, and so on. We will be talking about these in here as well. If we close this, we can go into interface instead, which is the main part that we want to talk about. Right away in this window, we can see that there are various different options. First of all, we have language. Here we have the option to change the language of our program. So we have obviously lots of different options, but keep in mind that if you do select a different language, you will need to close this program. And once you reopen it, then the language will be changed. So that is a very useful information. The zoom correction factor we will talk about in the next lesson when we will be talking about zooming and panning, so we don't need to see this right now, but we can go in and see, for example, theming. This is very interesting as it gives us the option to change the aesthetic of our workspace, which is what we are talking about in this lesson. So we can see right away here in change the theme that we have different options. At the moment, the one that is selected as default is high contrast, which is the first option here. So let's go and see the second one to see what differences there are. So you will notice right away that there is a lower contrast, that there is more concentrated on grays. We can also select this Min White Inkscape and notice how much of a difference we have now in this option, as it is all based on whites and very light grays. Then we can select Win 32, and it is a bit of a softer contrast with warmer shades of gray and also white. And then we have Use System Theme, and here we have much lower contrasts and again mainly shades of white and gray. So I personally prefer the dark option, so we will open this up again and select high contrast inverse, so the dark version of Inkscape. You will notice right below that here it shows us the location of the different themes inside of our computer. So this is where Inkscape has installed the various themes when we downloaded and installed our software. When opening this up, you will find the various themes. Another option we have in here is to change the scale of the font, so the size of the text inside of our software. So we can see this by dragging this node here, for example, and selecting Apply. Notice how the scale of our font has gotten much bigger. We can even try to make it larger. Again, select Apply. And notice how much bigger all of this font is, all of the text is. And then if we want to bring it back to the original scale, all we need to do is select this icon here. So reset font size to 100%, and it goes back to the original sizing. Another option we have right below this is the level of contrast. And again, just by sliding this node, we can change this. So we can really make the aesthetics and the view of our workspace very personal and based on our preferences very easily. We also have the option to change the icon themes. So if you will notice at the moment, we have selected multicolor. So you will notice here that they are very colored, and you can notice them also in this panel here on the right. So now if I were to change the option, so high color for example, you will see now that there is no colors in our icons, but they are just in shades of gray. We can also select Tango, for example, and see how they have changed completely now. They are very, very different. On our left panel and on our right panel, they have changed completely. And then we can also choose use system icons. And again, they have changed a lot. If we make the scale here a bit larger, we might be able to view them a bit better. We also have the option to select use symbolic icons, and notice how they go back to these default icons in the shades of gray. And then we can also select use default highlight colors, and that's when we go and select our icons. But let's deselect these two options here and bring this back to the original selection, which was multicolor. So now you see that we have our original icons from the start. Then going back to our window here, we can select toolbars. And here we have the option of selecting what tools we want to see inside of this space. So for example, by selecting these, we can remove or put them back in. So notice if I select this square icon, it will disappear from here. So that was the create squares. And then I can select also the create ellipse icon, and that will disappear. And we can do the same along all of this. We can add or remove any of these icons. And all we need to do to put them back is reselect them, and then they will appear visible again here. So pay attention when you're doing this, make sure that you're not forgetting anything. And if you feel like you're missing any of the tools here, just open your preferences, go into toolbars, and check here if everything is selected. We also have the option to make the icons larger, as I mentioned before. And we can do that here by, again, selecting this node and dragging. So notice how they are slowly getting a lot larger. And that way, when we are stretching out this panel, for example, we will be able to view them a lot easier. We can also change the size of the icons in the control bar up here. So again, we select the node and start dragging. And notice how much bigger all of these icons are now. Again, all of these options are subjective, they are personal, they are exclusively for your own needs, what you prefer and what you don't prefer, what you find easier to view and not. But now that we have seen all of these options to modify how we view our workspace, to change it up, change the position of our panels, and also view these little details like the colors and themes, we can move on to the second portion of our lesson, which is the keyboard shortcuts. We can find the keyboard shortcuts by selecting keyboard here in our window, and we will find all of the various shortcuts in this area. But before we go and see how to modify our shortcuts, we should talk about what they are, why they are so important, and which are the main ones we should learn. So keyboard shortcuts are extremely important as they help reduce the time that we spend working on a project. By learning a few of them, you will notice right away a difference in the time that you're spending working, and slowly but surely they become automatic to use, and very easy to memorize. As long as you use them a couple of times, you will start to learn how to use them. So let's go ahead and see which are the most important ones, at least at the start when you are learning to use a graphic design software. So we can open up our file drop-down menu here, and we can notice here on the right all of the various keyboard shortcuts. For sure, under the file drop-down menu, some of the most important shortcuts we can find in New. So we can recall the new, so how to create a new document by selecting on our keyboard the Control key and the letter N, and we select these contemporarily. By selecting them contemporarily, we will be able to open a new document. Instead, if we want to open an existing document, we will have to select contemporarily on our keyboard the Control key and the letter O. Following, one of the most important options here is save. We must always save the work that we are doing step by step. And we can do that very easily by selecting contemporarily the Control key and the letter S. So while we are working on a project, every so often we can select Control S on our keyboard and save our document very easily. We also have save as, and we can recall that with the Shift key, the Control key, and the letter S. Again, selecting all three of them contemporarily. We can also find print, which is very useful, Control and the letter P. You may notice that with a lot of these, some of the letters are the first letter of the word itself, so they are easy to remember in that sense. So in this case, print starts with a P, so the shortcut is the Control key and the P letter. We also have export, which is very important, Shift key, Control key, and the letter E. Close, we can select it by clicking our Control key and the W key. And quit is Control key and the Q key. And then if we go into our edit drop-down menu, we will have some other very important shortcuts that are used very often in any graphic design program. We have undo, so to undo an action that you have just created, we will select the Control key and the Z key. So this, for example, along with save and save as, this is one of those universal shortcuts in the sense that we will find that it will do the exact same function in many, many other programs, not only graphic design programs, but also other computer programs. By selecting Control and the letter Z, we will undo an action. So if you haven't already, try it out in other programs that can be online or installable. Another super important shortcut that we can learn is cut, which is Control X, so the letter X and the Control key selected always contemporarily. We have copy, which is selected with the Control key and the letter C, and paste, which is the Control key and the letter V. Another important shortcut we can have is delete, and this is easily selected by clicking our delete key on our keyboard. Select all, which is Control key and the letter A, and deselect, which is simply the escape key on our keyboard. So for starting off in this program, these are definitely some of the most important shortcuts that we can learn. And trust me, just by using them a few times, you will start getting the hang of it and learning them as you go. So now that we have seen the most important ones, we can go back into our preferences here in the bottom right corner, select preferences. And here we can see all the various tools that we can go and view the shortcuts of. So for example, if we were to open the first one, If we wanted to change this shortcut because for some reason we know it in a different way or we simply want it in a different way, all we need to do is double click and then select on our keyboard the new shortcut that we want. So we could select, for example, the Control key and the letter M contemporarily. And now notice that the shortcut will appear here. Now, I suggest personally not to go and change these shortcuts, at least not at the start when you're still learning them and learning how to use the program. It can be very confusing to create personalized shortcuts, but it is also very useful to know how to do it for future purposes. So now that we have seen how to change our workspace, how to move it around based on our needs, and also what shortcuts are, which ones are the most important ones, and how to modify them, we can end the lesson here. If you have enjoyed this lesson, make sure to leave a like. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can leave them in the comment box below the video. And if you want to give our page some support, subscribe to our channel, and that way you can stay updated on all our new courses and all our new lessons. I will see you in the next video. Thank you for following along.